Thank you. Thank you for having me on. And Victoria, thank you for your kind comments and your work. Victoria Ruiz has done terrific work in East San Jose, where I represent. And I appreciate your devoting this to net neutrality. It's such an important issue because it goes to the heart of democracy. The internet is one place where people can organize, people can speak without having to rely on big dollars. This program itself is an example of that. You don't need large corporate sponsors. And what net neutrality is about is saying we need to preserve the openness of the internet. You shouldn't have to pay for access to the internet itself. You shouldn't have to have wealth to have a voice on this new platform. So it's one of the most crucial issues of our democracy. The repeal of net neutrality would silence a lot of independent media. It would silence a lot of voices that are not airing on traditional media. And it also would mean higher consumer prices. I mean, what you would see a lot of cable companies doing is charging then for access to use your Gmail, access to use social media, almost bundling pricing the way you have bundled pricing for cable. So that's why I've strongly opposed Ajit Pai's decision. We voted in the House to overturn it. And now we need to make progress with the Senate and a new president.
No, I think that's really a great way to explain some of the dangers here for individual consumers. And I guess, one thing we've been hearing a bit today, Nathan Lemur, aide at the FCC, was saying, hey, they're having this live stream today, so I guess the internet's still working a year later. I guess that means that we never really needed net neutrality. To which I've kind of been saying this is sort of the tech policy equivalent of it's snowing outside, therefore there's climate change. But can unpack that a little bit for us, for your constituents who are like, I want to understand this a little bit better. Why should they be concerned a year later? Given that, to them, probably it seems like the internet hasn't changed that much yet. But, why should they still be concerned?
Well, it hasn't changed yet is the key question. But the focus is going to be, what are the internet service providers going to do? And if we don't reauthorize net neutrality, and by the way, many of them realize that we may reauthorize net neutrality, and so they aren't fully acting on the license that the administration has given them. But if we don't, what this means for ordinary people is you're going to eventually have these ISPs charging you like bundled services, like cable, for your product. So you could be charged one thing for using email, one thing for using social media, one thing for downloading data. You'll start to see a greater stratification of the internet. That's not to say that all independent voices or all live streams won't be banned, but what we're saying is a precedent is being set that money entitles you to faster speech on the internet, and that's so corrosive to democracy and so corrosive to the very concept of the internet.
And I think that's really important to underscore as well, especially, I think this debate has often been framed as if it's just sort of, Silicon Valley versus the telecoms, and, we're all just sort of caught in between. But, and, I guess I'd ask too, we're living in a world, with, severe climate change, the Trump administration's immigration policies, mass government surveillance. There's so many different issues, that people should care about. What makes this one important enough that you took some time out of your day to join a live stream about it? Why should people be caring about this, and what should people do if this is something that's important to them?
Well, first of all, I admire you for helping lead this live stream and for your organizing. And why this matters is I think the future of democracy is online. I mean, more and more people are getting their news online, more people are organizing online, more people are raising funds online. And so if democracy, if the internet is becoming in many ways the public forum, keeping it a place that is free from the corruption that our current politics are, is perhaps the best hope for a lot of other progressive policies. So if the internet gets hijacked to the highest bidder, that makes it far more difficult for progressive policies on racial justice, on climate change, on foreign policy. And that's why I think it's so important to preserve the internet. And we have to understand this is not for the most sophisticated organizers or people like you. I mean, this is to make sure that those who aren't extraordinarily tech savvy and may not devote their whole lives to that have an equal forum on the internet, and that this remains the promise of the internet, which was to democratize access to information and democratize access to political participation, that remains possible.
I think that's very well said, and absolutely important. We've been saying throughout the day that this is an issue that affects everyone, but clearly it's going to disproportionately impact people that are already disadvantaged in our society, low-income folks, communities of color, et cetera. Now, but outside of that, I think we also look at the polls, which show that more than 80% of Americans, regardless of their political affiliation, support net neutrality, which means there's a whole lot of Trump voters and conservatives and libertarians out there that that support this issue. And what would you say to them? Why should conservatives, reaching across the aisle, or why should Republicans in the Senate actually get on board and support net neutrality? Why is this not really a partisan issue, even though it's playing out that way in Washington, D.C.?
Well, because the irony is a lot of Trump supporters were grassroots and had not participated before, and he organized very successfully online in a policy that put more power in the hands of elites and controlling the internet would actually be more hostile, not just to someone like Bernie Sanders. It would be more hostile to outsiders on the Republican side, like Donald Trump or conservative voices who feel marginalized by big corporations. So if you believe democracy should be about individuals and not about corporations, you should be for net neutrality. I mean, it's and you're absolutely right to point out the disproportionate impact on marginalized communities, in communities of color, certain rural communities, because a lot of the failure to have access to the internet isn't about just failure of an infrastructure. It's about the lack of affordability. And again, what net neutrality does is allows these companies to price discriminate. So they technically may be offering internet everywhere, but if they've priced people out in certain areas, then that's not true access.
That's very well said. And Congressman, I know your district has a number of different types of communities. One thing that's come up a lot is sort of rural access. Talk a little bit about that, because the talking point I'm hearing from the telecoms is, and they're also saying this about low-income communities in cities as well. They're basically saying, like, look, we can either try to get more people online, or we can have basic net neutrality protections, but like you can't have both. Do you agree with?
I totally reject that. I mean, do you think these ISPs have taken any of their profits and invested it in rural America? No. I mean, where is the evidence of that? Instead, they've invested it like AT&T did with mergers and with CNN. I mean, that's where the profits are going. So there's no evidence that they're investing in rural America. What we need in rural America, frankly, are community or local broadband providers to have assistance from the federal government to build out those last mile. For $40 billion, you could hook up every part of this country with affordable internet service, high-speed internet service. That's the amount we spend in 1 year in Afghanistan. So if we really want high-speed internet in every part of the country, there are policies that will get there through federal government support, but they have nothing to do with giving more profits to the ISPs.
No, I couldn't agree more with that, especially given, these same ISPs have spent tremendous amounts of money lobbying to make it more difficult for municipalities to set up their own broadband, or, to enable competition in the market. Congressman, I'm sure that
By the way, one other point, because you made me think of this. The ISPs can't have it both ways. They can't say, okay, you want net neutrality because or a repeal of net neutrality because that's going to allow them to make more money to build rural broadband. First of all, they are making more money, but they're not putting it in rural broadband. But they're acknowledging they need to make more money to do it, and then say, well, it's not going to have higher prices. How are they making more money if it's not going to higher prices? So they should acknowledge that it is leading to higher prices. It's allowing them to make more money. If they were putting that money into rural broadband in communities of color, we could have an argument. But they're putting those money into stock buybacks and mergers.
No, that's exactly right. And so my last question, Congressman, is sort of what's the path forward here? So, you're a member of the House. The House passed the Save the Internet Act. Mitch McConnell is blocking it in the Senate. We were just at his office this morning. A coalition of public interest groups delivered more than 3.5 million signatures to Mitch McConnell.
Right.
But you and I both know that he might not listen to us. And so if he doesn't, what do you see the path forward here? Do you think Democrats could make a play during the appropriations process? How do you see things playing out with the federal court case? I'm hoping this is an issue that you all are going to keep fighting on. And so what's how do we keep fighting on this, and what should folks at home do?
We're going to keep fighting. And the reason that Congress finally moved on this is because of organizing from activists like yourself, leaders like yourself across this country. I would just say organize. The internet is such a powerful tool. There's no more powerful political voice than people who are effective digital organizers. And we need to organize to help pass this through the Senate. And we need to organize to put pressure on the president, or to have a new president sign this. But eventually, I think the only thing that's going to prevail is the continued type of organization that you have done and continue to do.
Well, I think that's a great place to put a bow on it. Thank you so much, Congressman Ro Khanna, for joining us. Obviously, a longtime big supporter of net neutrality, so we appreciate you taking your time to come on and share your views. Any last words or anything else you'd care to say on this?
Well, thank you. Thank you for not letting this issue fall out of the headlines, out of people's minds. Thank you for organizing this live stream. And just continue this, your terrific work and terrific leadership. And ultimately, I'm 100% confident we will prevail if we keep doing the hard work.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Congressman. And I really agree. And one thing that we've continued to say to folks is that, look, we have to play a long game here. And the biggest threat actually is if bad legislation that's backed by internet service providers were to pass in the meantime, because it's actually fairly easy. A future FCC chair could more or less easily reverse what Ajit Pai did, especially with grassroots support and organizing. But if some of the ISP-backed legislation that have been pushed by, for example, Republicans on the House Energy and Commerce Committee were to pass, that would be very difficult for us to undo. So I do think it's important that we keep up the fight for real net neutrality and not just sort of false solutions that don't really get us to where we need to be.
You're absolutely right, and thank you for having such a nuanced and thoughtful perspective on that.
We try. I mean, it's important to get this stuff right. So anyhow, again, Congressman, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
The rest of your day.